Welcome to Charts Today. My name's David Linton, and today's edition for Monday, the 30th of April, comes to you from London. And we start, as always, by looking at the dollar. And we see here this candle last week, a very strong week for the dollar, and that shows up in the daily moves up, and that's taken the lagging line back above the cloud. So the big news last week was that the dollar has gone from medium-term bearish to medium-term bullish, and so this could be the beginning of a recovery in the dollar, looking quite strong. And we've got upside targets of around 2.5%. Looking at the euro, of course, that means weaker euro against the dollar and just coming out below its cloud as well. So euro strength coming to an end against the dollar. Um, and Japanese yen, actually, interestingly, the dollar didn't quite make it above the cloud last week, so this is one last hurdle for the dollar on that medium-term chart. Less work to do on the long-term chart. Uh, Looking at sterling, sterling collapsed on Friday. We had bad GDP growth numbers out, and sterling collapsed on that news. And we're seeing here we're back to the beginning of March level, but more importantly, we're back below the cloud. So it does look like sterling is in for a weaker time. We've got downside targets of about 3% against the dollar, and we see that fall similarly against the euro. A really big fall down there, and that's giving us another 1% downside in the short-term chart. So the sterling situation looking now more bearish than it has done, and the market not pricing in an interest rate rise in May. And we see here that collapse on the Australian dollar as well. Sorry, the Swiss franc, and on the Australian dollar, we see a similar collapse in price down to 182 from 185. So it really was aggressive, that fall on Friday. Bitcoin is down 2.8% this morning. Still short-term bullish, but really struggling on the medium-term chart. We're seeing the long-term chart. Bitcoin has come all the way back. Can it recover? This is the key thing. U.S. stock markets actually had quite a good end to the week. Uh, all the major indices were up, and we see here at the last few days of the week really quite a strong recovery. We are still short-term and medium-term bearish on the S&P 500. The Nasdaq actually was very strong on Friday with some very big moves on the tech majors, which we'll look at. But we're still bearish on the short term, medium term, just regaining some bullishness there. But this volatility at the end of quite a long trend is still disconcerting, and it's too early to say that the market will fully recover. And looking at the Dow, we see that as well, a sell-off there, and we're still bearish on both charts. And the broader based Russell 2000 has actually fared better than most of the tighter held indices in terms of holding its bullish trend in the medium term and short term. But still too early to say. Looks like we will open higher today, though. The S&P futures up a third of a percent or a quarter of a percent, and the Nasdaq E-mini is also up nearly 0.5%. So we are just seeing it's likely that stocks will open higher in the US today. FTSE up quite strongly this morning. News in the market: the Sainsbury's up. So there's my Sainsbury's on my icon screen. Certainly up about 15%. It was as high as 20% at one stage, but the FTSE higher. And remember that weaker sterling is going to have an impact on UK earnings. So the FTSE generally likes weaker sterling. And we're seeing here the FTSE 250 actually looking quite strong now as well in terms of getting back above the cloud. Strangely, looking better than the US indices right now in terms of the recovery. The DAX is not quite above the cloud yet, so it's not looking as strong. And the CAC 40, actually, we talked about this on Friday, the French market looking better. It is recovering above the cloud and testing new highs. So the Japanese market was up very slightly, up quarter of a percent, not fully recovered yet on the medium term. Hang Seng also was up quite sharply, and the Chinese market was up very slightly, but still looking quite worrying medium and long term. This is the one stock market that is still a worry. The Sensex, the Indian market, recovering back above the cloud, and the Australian market also now just recovering back above the cloud. So markets generally recovering. Looking at stock markets, that is. Brent crude a little bit lower this morning, just turning a little bit bearish, just at 73.76. So just struggling to get back above that 75 level, but still holding the 70s, looking pretty strong. WTI is actually off and bearish short term, And if we look at US nat gas deteriorating again, just sitting at this 276. It seems like US nat gas has been sitting at this level for the last 3 months. It's just in the doldrums. Gold is down again this morning, so just short-term bearish. That stronger dollar not helping. Medium and long-term trend still bullish. Silver uh, is just teetering along the bottom there. Looks like it will break lower. US 10-year yields back below the 3%. They were spent most of last week above the 3%. The week before last, we really see that big move in yields. It does look like we'll hold around these levels, but short term we are just bearish for the moment. And we've talked about the bond market. The yield is obviously the inverse of the bond price, and here we see German bonds just struggling to hold the gains that they made towards the end of last week. Still bullish short term, but bearish medium and long term bonds look like they're in for a rough ride in the coming months. Taking a look at some of the US stocks, Apple was down on Friday, so it's the weak point in the tech majors at the moment. Amazon was actually up sharply on results last week, really touching a new all-time high there at one point. We see that in the daily candle, but looking very strong indeed. Still, the real standout in US tech was up 3.6% on Friday. Taking a look at Alphabet, really struggling as well. So Alphabet and Apple in the camp of not rising very much. Facebook also just struggling to move on Friday, but Microsoft was actually looking quite strong. But overall, tech had quite a good week in the US last week, and it'll be interesting to see if we can continue that this week. Microsoft was up quite strongly. That's it for today. Until tomorrow, happy charting. See you then.